humor me. We just had some technical problems with the first evening Kabbalah class last week, and I'd like to teach it with a class and edit them together. So if I know there are a few people that were in that class, and I apologize for the repetition. It's just the first 15 minutes or so of the class. But for those who weren't there, it's actually nice because it's chapter 3 and opening up some of the details of chapter 3 of the Tanya, which we did pretty quickly. So if you're okay, we will pause as soon as Adam. Let me know when you have those slides. Okay. So we'll pause. I'll kind of set it up so that we can edit it together, and then we'll leave the Tanya, do the beginning of Practical Kabbalah, and then come back to our class. So where are we for a quick review? We've gone through chapters 1 through 8. Are we, Adam? We're going. We're good.
Yeah, we're recording.
So this is going live now for thanks. So we've gone through chapters. Need another chapter 9? There you go. Here, just grab one out of here. Pass this around for whoever needs. So we've gone through chapters 1 through 8, which have been kind of the info section of what we're calling the user's manual for our soul. And that showed us everything from the point that we have 2 souls, the animal soul, which is this direction, the divine soul, which is other-centered, this direction, the structure of those souls, be it how the 10 sfirot flow through as 10 kochot, as 10 attributes through our soul, and also how they express in their garments, each of them with thought, speech, and action as 3 sets of garments, and painted a whole picture of the structure of our soul. That's chapter 9, so if you don't have it, feel free to.
Still don't have it, because it ran out. I have 7.
Oh,
Oh, here's 9.
there you go.
It's for the.
Never mind.
Everyone's covered?
I think.
Good,
That's
good,
the
good.
same one.
This is what you did last week.
Yes.
Yes, we're continuing, yes. Very good.
We had these slides.
You're good. So So let me set that up, and you guys are good to record. Everything will be captured so we can re-edit it. Okay. So we're about to start in the Tanya. We've started already chapter 9, which is about the battle of the souls. So we'll get back to that in about 15-20 minutes. And let's start now. Welcome anyone who's watching online to Intro to Kabbalah. This is actually our morning class called User's Guide to the Soul. We just had a small technical glitch with the first 15 minutes of the class you're going to watch. So we're reteaching that and learning it with this group, and then we'll transition to the evening class. So everything should make sense as you're watching. Thanks, Maya. And we're going to be using Label Wolf's text, Practical Kabbalah, which is available anywhere. Practical Kabbalah by Rabbi Label Wolf. We'll be following through that. So if you're watching at home, good idea to get a copy of this book, and we'll announce the pages as we introduce readings. And let me say, even if you're out there, I look forward to learning from each person that I sit down with to learn, including yourselves. As Label often says, I've heard myself talk about this quite a bit, in my case, even when no one else is around. So feel free to email in questions. If you're going to start watching live, you can text in questions as we're recording and be part of the class. I'm looking forward to learning from you. Before we start getting into Kabbalah, let's look at the structure of the soul and mind, body, and soul, and what those definitions are. And for those here, why don't you grab one of these so you can follow as we go along. So if you pull up, please, that first slide, Adam. This is a model of who we actually are from a kabbalistic perspective. Right, this is from Practical Kabbalah, page 36. And this shows you sort of a diagram of what the soul is. Often in the West, we think of the soul as a single point of light within, or as a uniform glowing ball of light, or something along those lines. In Judaism, the soul is quite a complex being, a complex living organism. And here's a basic structure of what it is. The soul is an umbilical cord flowing from the bottom of this diagram, space, time, and consciousness, so this world where we are, flowing upward through 4 spiritual worlds until finally it flows out of what we call the Ein Sof, which simply means infinite, without end. So in Kabbalah, Ein Sof is the term most often used for God. We'll mostly stick with that. Sorry, if we need to share, can we pass a few around? I apologize if there aren't enough. Thank you. Oh, you've got it. Good. Beautiful. So the soul is like an umbilical cord flowing from life, from the here and now, up through these 4 spiritual worlds until it flows out of the Ein Sof. And we can see the 4 spiritual worlds. Perhaps we'll get into them a little more detail in a later class. If there were this infinite light, or in fact this infinity, it's not even a light yet, but it emits an infinite light, and that light would be impossible for us to use because if we encountered it, we would be nullified like the flame of a candle within the sphere of the sun. A tiny candle flame in a dark room may have reality, but put it into the center of the sphere of the sun, there's really no candle flame there, it's just sun. So we can't use that light, it's too bright. So in order to dim it, the Ein Sof created a huge barrier where none of the light gets through whatsoever, like a shade on a lamp. And yet, even though none of the light gets through, there's an impression on the other side and more light comes through, which unfortunately is still infinite light that we can't use. Right? So even this world of Atzilus is still too bright, we would have no being. So another barrier, another shade is put on, and finally another, until finally we get down to this world where there's almost no spiritual light. And now we can actually see, move around, and we can use that light as beings. So to get back to the definition, the soul is a spiritual umbilical cord flowing from our reality up through these spiritual worlds, emerging out of the Ein Sof. And just to clarify, spiritual worlds are not sci-fi, other dimensional, different realities where different things are happening. It's the same world moving upwards with the same beings, however, it's much more subtle, much more energetic and spiritual.
In Yiddish, Ein Sof means one secret.
A sod is secret, sod, yeah? So yeah, and ein it means one in Yiddish, that's correct, but in Hebrew, ein means without, and sof means end. So it's a Hebrew term, yeah? But
Meaning what?
infinite, without end.
Oh.
But there may be some nice Hasidus in that. Well, I'll have to check if that's the case. That sounds beautiful. Now, what is the body? The soul is a very spiritual creature, has a lot of trouble picking up this pen, has a lot of trouble speaking with a physical mouth, has a lot of trouble walking around, eating food. The soul's not used to physical reality. It needs some kind of a vehicle to navigate all that. That vehicle, which we perhaps call the spacesuit of the soul, is the body. So when you look at your body, what is it? That's the vehicle by which your soul, the spiritual being, navigates time and space and even consciousness. Physical brain thinking physical thoughts. That's the body's role, and the soul can only think physical thoughts through the medium of the body. And finally, what's mind? We'll define that very simply. As the soul flows through the body, mind is the byproduct of the soul flowing through the brain. So soul flows through physical brain, byproduct, mind. Those are our 3 terms we'll use in these 5 classes as we go through the basics of Kabbalah: soul, mind, and body. And usually when I get to this point, people realize it's a whole new language, new terms that we're trying to adapt. There's an anecdote about a fellow from Poland who spoke mostly Yiddish and Polish, and he came to America and he was taking an English class, and the teacher said, "Can somebody please spell the word cultivate?" And he raised his hand, very proudly spelled it correctly, and then the teacher said, "Good, now can you use it in a sentence?" And he said, "Of course, I was waiting at the bus stop, but it was too cultivate, so I went back inside." Yeah, there's your Yiddish, right? I actually got a snort on the original document, right from my friend, right?
And the teacher gave him an A.
There you go. So what is Kabbalah? And from people in this room who've been learning, how would you define Kabbalah primarily? What does Kabbalah mean?
Spiritual being.
Very good. So the mystical information of Judaism. And the word itself, Kabbalah, means what? Receiving. Lekabel, to receive. So Kabbalah primarily is spoken about as a means of receiving that mystical information. And that's very much how it functions. Something was transmitted at Sinai beyond the text of the Torah. There was something, say, above that text that couldn't be put into words. And that was transmitted to Moshe, who taught it to a circle of people, and throughout history it's been received and transmitted from teacher to student. Not something you can really explain consciously, but somehow you can still receive it and transmit it to students later on, and it arrives down to us. And let me say, first of all, I probably no one in this room thinks of themselves as a Makubal. Myself also. I think of myself as a student of Kabbalah, not as a Kabbalist. But even for people like us who are just learning the basics, it is something you still can receive at your level, whatever that is, and transmit in whatever way to the people in your environment.
When do you earn the title of Kabbalist?
Kabbalists, that's a very rare breed. So these are people that are at a very lofty level in terms of learning and personality, refinement, and then there's a certain gift that I'm told comes where they receive a flow of something, and I don't know what that's about. For me, I'm just a normal guy trying to learn, but we're told each one of us can still receive something of the flow and still teach it in our manner to the people in our environment, even if we're not Kabbalists. So big disclaimer there.
Do you know one?
I've encountered a few people that are said to be Kabbalists. I don't have an antenna for that, so I just take their word for it. So yes, on the one hand, it is a transmission of a mystical tradition that was hidden, and for various reasons now is much more acceptable and accessible, and people like us can get together and learn it in all kinds of languages, wherever you want. There's resources everywhere, and you can look up and see why it is in history that, in particular now, new expressions of Kabbalah have emerged that are much easier for someone to learn who doesn't know Aramaic fluently, who doesn't learn 18 hours a day, who isn't necessarily a man, etc., etc. But now it's a tool for all of us, and let's dive in. But the second definition of Kabbalah is a little more counterintuitive. And to see that, let's look at how the word, or the root, is used in the Torah. In fact, the only time in the 5 books of Moses that the root for Kabbalah is used in the Torah. And that is in Exodus 26:5, and the term is makbilot halulaot, right? The loops are corresponding. So what's happening? We're building the Mishkan, we're building the tabernacle, and there's these curtains, these drapes, that are on the outside, and they have to be attached together. So here's the instructions: make 50 loops on the end of one, 50 on the end of the other, and the loops should be corresponding each to her sister, is actually the word it uses. It's a feminine. And then attach them together. So this word corresponding, one corresponding to the other, has something to do with Kabbalah as well. Because when we use a root in the Torah, it's always connected. In Hebrew, words are very defined, and any root, all its meanings branch out of one point. It's not like English, where words can have different connotations that are unrelated because of poetry, etc. So how is Kabbalah like correspondence, right? How does that work? The point is, we're trying to get at realities above consciousness. Right? So here I am, I'm in consciousness, I have my thoughts, I have my emotions, I'm trying to get at realities above consciousness, and I can't. I can only imagine things that have space, time, and consciousness elements. I can't visualize things that don't have space, time, consciousness elements. Give it a shot, right? Imagine the Ein Sof. Okay, I'm seeing light in space. That's what I'm seeing. Obviously, that's not the Ein Sof. Right? So imagination can try and create visualizations, and that can be useful. But keep in mind, all of our visualizations are still within time, space, and consciousness. That's how we're built. So how do we get above time, space, and consciousness to even the first spiritual aspect of Asiya and start to get some conscious understanding of spirituality? The way we do it in Kabbalah is to create correspondences. Correspondences. So we find a model within consciousness. We look at the relationship between the parts of the model. How do they fit together? How does it work? And then we recognize that that model in the physical reality is flowing out of a model in spiritual reality. Now, why is that? That's because that's the Kabbalistic vision of the world to begin with. Physical world does not exist independently. Physical world is flowing out of spiritual world, and spiritual world is creating physical world. Well, actually, Ein Sof is creating physical world and spiritual world, but the physical flows out of the spiritual, put it that way. So everything in the physical has its form and structure because it mirrors its spiritual source. That's why the physical body is so complex, is because the soul is so complex. So whenever you're looking at some physical model, you're seeing a map of the spiritual model, and by understanding the components of the physical model and making a corresponding model, we can start to get an inner sense of what's happening in the spiritual. Am I making sense? Yeah, you going with this? Yeah, so for instance, we've talked about light many times in this class. Let's look at light as a physical model for how we can understand the Or Ein Sof, spiritual light of some kind, of any kind. Right? So just popcorn out and think at home, what are qualities of light? What effect does light have on me? What are aspects of light that you might just consider? Anything. Light does what? Makes you feel what? Is what?
Feels warm.
Warm. Good. Makes you feel good and warm, right?
Brightness in the world.
Brightness in the world, and brightness does what?
Go away.
Makes darkness go away. Very nice.
Permits me to read.
Permits me to read. Permits me to see things. Right. So all these issues, how physical light makes us feel, so does spiritual light make us feel spiritually elevated. Right? It permits us to observe things that otherwise were in the dark. Also, spiritual light lets us observe spiritual aspects, internal aspects that otherwise would be in the dark. And in fact, as you said, the light chases away darkness instantly, so does spiritual light then make spiritual darkness vanish, and we recognize, like in Hanukkah, that the darkness was just the absence of light. Let's not go deep into that. Add some other things. Physical light, we know, is always attached to a luminary. If I see a beam of light coming through the window, I don't think it has its own existence. I know there's a luminary, the sun. If the luminary goes, the beam of light goes. Same thing with spiritual light. Spiritual light comes from the Ein Sof. If there's something called spiritual light, there must be a luminary. It also seems to travel physical light through space almost instantly. So does spiritual light travel through, quote-unquote, spiritual space almost instantly. Right? A great, lofty spiritual being can connect with a very lowly spiritual being, even though there's a great distance, instantly through this thing, spiritual light. So just to give you a taste, we're looking at the components of the physical model of light, and now trying to leap over that gap into the superconscious and say, okay, there's something called spiritual light that has the same components, and I'm starting to understand something about its spiritual reality by using a corresponding model. That's a primary tool of Kabbalah, and you'll see we'll use it very often in this class as we come back to it.
Does the idea of connection also go along with that, the idea of correspondences, because those loops are there for the purpose of connection?
Yeah, the question is connection part of that concept?
Yeah.
Because the loops are corresponding, so they connect. I would think intuitively yes. I mean, I haven't read someone about that, but I would think intuitively yes. The whole point of the whole structure of the world is for us to recognize the Ein Sof and connect to it. So no doubt, the only reason that there are these correspondences for us to be able to connect to the Ein Sof. So I like that very much. Another level. Yeah, and two little points that I will touch on in the video shortly. One is well, we're going to define the Sfirot. Okay, so let's look at the next page. Called the human metaphor of the Sfirot. These are the building blocks, the basic literature of Kabbalah, the basic pieces of Kabbalah. And what you see here is called the tree of life, Eitz Chaim. They're called the Sfirot. And if you're looking at them, you might mistake them for something studied in the East, which is chakras, right? The phenomenon of chakras. And people often see a map like this with the human body and the Sfirot placed on them, and they think, oh, these are the Jewish version of the chakras. Mm-hmm. Where our class starts, the evening class, I'll be explaining that they have nothing to do with chakras. So they're a different phenomenon entirely. But just to introduce them, these are 10 Sfirot. The word is hard to define, and we'll define it in 3 ways in just a moment. But they're 10 emanations flowing out of the Ein Sof that flow through all levels of existence, through our whole soul, down from the top to the bottom. And one thing I'll mention later, there's 2 main categories of the Sfirot. There is the intellectual, which are the 3 on top, leaving out Keter, Chochmah, Bina, and Dat. That's called Seichel. Those are intellectual Sfirot. And then there's 7 on the bottom, which are emotional and behavioral. That's the main distinction, main grouping. Seichel, and emotional, intellectual and emotional. And one other little confusion is that on the one hand we talk about the sfirot in terms of what comes from the Ein Sof and what flows through the cosmos, and those are the sfirot proper. We also talk about the sfirot as something within us in our literature. There you might use the word powers, kochot, attributes, or sometimes even midot, right? Midot mainly is the emotional attributes are called midot. But the way the sfirot flow within me, that's my attributes, my internal powers, my kochot, or my midot emotionally. The way they flow in the cosmos, that's always called the sfirot. But sometimes you'll hear sfirot discussed about my internal state. And so here I'm going to get back to our regular class, and online you'll be joining the evening class. I hope that you'll join us for the rest of the 5, and feel free to be in touch with questions, and I wish you an amazing, amazing journey of learning. Thank you.
What's that?
What's which?
What's that?
Dat is translated as knowledge, but it's more like connection.
Simply what?
Connection, intellectual connection.
So that's connecting the seichel and the emotion.
Very much, yeah. Yeah, so if I learn somebody won a lottery in Michigan, information that I know. If I learn my wife won the lottery in Michigan, wah! Now it's connected to my emotions. So dat, on the first instance, has not ignited. Second instance has ignited. So I'm connected to information. All right.
Okay.
Is that different? So here we are in chapter 9. We've learned about starting to learn about the application of all this information, about what it is that we can do with the knowledge of our soul to really improve how we flow through our body as a soul, to be more masterful. So we went through and we looked at, first of all, where each of the 2 souls are headquartered in our being, right? So divine soul is headquarters mainly is where? First, the brain, right? It loves flowing in through intellect first. It's a godly soul, but it primarily relates to intellect in our consciousness. And from there it flows to where in the heart? The right side, the part that deals with air, spirituality, that more spiritual aspect of my heart. And the animal soul is housed where? Left side. And gets around the body how? The blood, right? So in the blood and the left side of the heart. So that's where they are. And then there's this metaphor called the city. The city is what? Body. Us, right? The body. Yeah, exactly. We're the city. And then these 2 souls are described as being in a battle, like 2 rulers over a city, and they each want to rule the city completely. They want to expel the other. They want to have complete control over the whole thing. And then the Alter Rebbe goes through all the aspects of the soul we've learned about. So it wants to express through all 10 attributes, all 10 kochot, intellect and emotions, completely, and not allow the other to have even one moment of expression through the eternal aspects of the soul. And also, it wants to make sure when the soul finally gets around to using the megaphone and the computer and the various other mechanical devices here in our spacesuit, that it's only the divine soul that can use it, or from the animal perspective, only the animal soul. Each of them want to use all 3 garments of expression and just rule the roost. And then the Alter Rebbe went through, from the perspective of the divine soul, just the absolute ideal outcome, right? So it would flow through only divine other-centered, godly thoughts would flow through the intellect, and only the emotions that only feel love and awe for things about helping people around me and about doing wonderful things and connecting with God. I'd only think about it, I'd only speak about it, I'd only talk about it. Right? That's the divine soul's plan. And furthermore, not only would the animal soul not get to express, but even the internal drive of the animal soul would get stripped of its what's called its unclean garments. Right? So not only would the animal soul not be able to express, but everything the animal soul would even want to talk about or express is just, that'd be taken away, right? So I like brownies. Now the animal soul would never even think about a brownie, right? Or at least never think about it in terms of it tastes good and I like it, right? Yeah, you got to eat it because you got to go out and help the world, sure, but it could be anything. Brownie, bread, doesn't matter. The animal soul the object of desire of the animal soul ultimately would be stripped away, and all that will be left is the neutral drive, which could be redirected according to the compass bearing of the divine soul. And as we said, that is a very lofty objective. Now you're in the realm of a tzaddik. So we shouldn't go into this journey thinking we're going to find techniques that will get us to that place. It's a rare person that can actually completely transform their internal drive of their animal soul. However, and here I want to give a little backpedal on what I spoke about last class, it's not that we can't benefit from that perspective. It's not that we can't do any of that work. Right? The first step you take in a spiritual journey like this is recognizing my actual status. Right? So sometimes you open this up and you hear tzaddik and you get all romantic and I wonder if I'm a tzaddik and what level is my soul, and it's very nice. If you think you're a tzaddik, as Shais Taub says, try for one day following every single impulse, saying everything that occurs to you, doing everything that occurs to you, and if by the end of the day you're not dead in a hospital or in jail, then you're a tzaddik. Okay? But if you're like the rest of us, you often have the little voice that says, oh, maybe not, or how about this, or wouldn't this be fun? And we need discretion, right? So a tzaddik has none of that. A tzaddik has transformed that entirely. It's a very rare person. However, we should still try to be a tzaddik. That's our oath, right? So even if we recognize I'm a normal person, I'm a person with some weaknesses and some strengths, and I'm just trying to get better, that's my path. I'm going to be honest with myself. I can still benefit from this idea that the internal drive of the Yetzer Hara can be transformed in certain areas, right? I can take one aspect of my life and I can move it more towards the way a tzaddik relates to the world. And the two tools we talked about the terms are iskafia and ishafcha. It's tricky. Iskafia and ishafcha. Iskafia is when I just stop the expression of the animal soul, even though it's still going, right? You know, I wanna say this thing to this person. It's occurring to me to say it. I'm not going to say it. It occurs to me again. I'm not going to say it. It occurs to me again. I'm not going to say it. And the animal soul is just pushing against this wall, and I've just stopped it. Because you know what? Even though I feel like saying it, and I've said it 100 times, I recognize it's not productive. It's not helping anybody. It's not helping them. It's only self-centered. Just not going to say it, right? And the animal soul will fight, and I'll knock on that door 100 times, and I won't open the door. I'll knock another 100 times. I won't open the door. That's iskafia. That's stopping it. Hischafcha is where finally the animal soul gives up on that, and now it's sitting there and it says, well, I'm not going to knock on this door. What else am I going to do, right? And then the divine soul comes and says, hey, maybe you say something helpful. And then you get the energy back, and the animal soul can actually flow into something else. You can take the energy and reclaim it and use it for something productive, right? So that's hischafcha, where you've actually turned the energy around and used it for something other-centered. So we can't, most of us, the vast majority of us, experience that with all of life. But we can take one aspect of our life and say, I'm going to stop this detail of my consciousness. I'm going to work on getting that energy around, and I can actually transform it. Right? And that's the kind of work that we'll learn how to do. So whether it's about anger, whether it's about seeking pleasures, whether it's food or other things, whatever it is, whether it's sitting and wasting time watching TV, maybe I want to start working with that. We can take pieces of our life and move them from where I'm behaving more like a Rasha in that context to I'm behaving more like a tzaddik. Doesn't mean I become a tzaddik, but this is how we make progress. We aim towards it. Yeah?
Would an example of this be like if you wanted to stop smoking, for example?
Exactly.
That would be like a scapula, if you can stop each time. And then the other example would you turn it around and you say, I will stop smoking for 5 days and see how I do. And then if you want to go back, you can go back. And I just want to see the difference between those two terms.
Yeah, so rather than smoking, let's say watching TV. Okay, say I watch TV 8 hours a day, and I realize it's limiting my relationships. I'm not being productive in the world, but I'm kind of addicted to it. I get home and I turn the TV on. That's what I do till I fall asleep, right? So iskafia would be, I'm going to unplug the TV, I'm going to stick it in the attic, and I'm just not going to watch TV no matter how many times I want to, right? I know now we have phones, so it's irrelevant, but go back with me 20 years, right? So that's iskafia. I'm just going to stop it. Hisafcha is now, okay, I no longer have an urge to watch TV. It's a year and a half later. It's out of my life. I have that energy back for other things. It's improving relationships. I'm learning. I'm bettering the world with that time. So now I have the energy back, and I'm not disturbed by it. Maybe I can even take the TV down and watch a documentary about something that will help me improve the world. Right? I've gotten to the point where even the TV itself can now be turned around and used to help things. It's not a problem for me anymore. Right?
Okay.
So iskafi is the initial forceful stopping of the nefesh meat from expressing. Hisafcha is now, I've transformed the internal drive itself and redirected it to something else.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll go through some tools for that as we go through the Tanya. Don't think that this is going to make it tzaddik. It is sefer shel beinoni. So beinoni is really the ultimate goal, which is also a very lofty goal. But also don't give up that we shouldn't try and be more like a tzaddik every day. That's the work. So we are top of 148. Here, if you help your neighbor find the spot, it's right at the end of the chapter. It starts, namely, thoughts of God and His Torah. And the faculty of action, if you like. Yeah.
No, we got it here.
There you go. There we go. שהן מחשבת השם בתורתו להיות שיחתו כל היום לא פסיק פומי מגרסה.
Namely, thoughts of God in his Torah, in which he would speak all day, his mouth never ceasing from study.
Right, so this is not necessarily a person that's quoting Torah all day. And you say, how are you doing? And he says, Bereshit bara. But it's even in normal conversations, they're relating it to something higher. Right? So even if it's not formal Torah study, and maybe he's talking about that, but even when they're just eating, really the conversation is a higher conversation where they're trying to learn, they're trying to get at something, they're preparing to do a mitzvah. So they never just chat for the sake of chewing the fat. They're always directing, trying to get at something higher.
How does his mouth study?
When you speak, right now, you asked a question in a Torah class, so your mouth is studying. That's study. You just did it. That's how you did it. Yeah, that easy, right? You open a book, read it, and voila, right? As long as you're not doing it to be known as a sage or to get money.
That means I study all day.
There you go. Good. V'choach ha'maaseh.
Birthday the other day. Do you know that?
Happy birthday. 70.
Something like that.
Okay. Yashko.
Last Tuesday was his big birthday.
Oh, very nice. Big meaning.
Did you know Benny Gervitz?
Yeah.
Benny Gervitz
Tell the story again.
Huh?
You can tell the story again. That's
You
okay.
know,
No, go ahead.
Benny, when he hit his 90s, got tired of people asking him, how old are you?
Yeah.
So he made up a little story. He said, when I was a little boy, the Dead Sea hadn't even gotten sick.
That sounds like Benny. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you. I'll take that reprimand. It's Mazel tov on your birthday.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. V'choach hamasi shebiadav ushar ramach v'arav yeh b'maseh hamitzvot levad shehu levush hashlishi shel nefesh elokit.
And the faculty of action vested in his hands and the rest of his 248 organs. This faculty being the third of the garments of the divine soul, be engaged in the fulfillment of the mitzvot. That he utilizes his ability to act solely in the observance of the mitzvot.
So what will my physical body be doing? It'll be going to prepare to do a mitzvah, going to help somebody, getting myself ready to come to the temple and pray. That's what I'll be doing all the time. This physical body will be expressing the divine soul, and that is what finishes the circuit, right? So I had the intellect, chokhmah ignited of the divine soul. It flowed through all the powers. Now my physical brain thought about it, my physical heart thought about it, and jumped back up. I decided to talk about it. Finally, I'm now doing stuff, and everything that comes out, thought, speech, and action, is just the divine soul expressing, right? That's the divine soul winning the battle. And we don't want to leave out the animal soul, so the animal soul gets one sentence here, right? Ach nefesh habamit shemehaklipa ritzona lehefech mamash.
But the animal soul derived from klipa desires the very opposite. It desires that the body be pervaded with its faculties and its thought, speech, and action.
And so everything we just said about the divine soul, and the animal soul wants to do it also. Right? And one or the other is going to win at every moment. One or the other is expressing. It's a dichotomy. And so we can start to create this category of recognizing nefesh elokit, nefesh b'amit, and start to track which one is dormant right now, which one is active, and who's thinking and who's speaking and who's behaving.
What about all the mundane stuff we do every day?
Right. So that's klipa, right? Klipa noga.
I used to see a
So-
cartoon where there was the devil was on one shoulder and an angel was on the other, and they sparred back and forth just like you're talking.
Exactly. So that's the phenomenon. The difference is, and to be clear, with us, it's not an angel; it's a soul, and they're different. And really, it's not a devil. And it's actually you brought up exactly what he's about to raise, in that we sometimes take in from the wider culture around us that the Yetzer Hara, or the negative impulse, or the counterproductive, self-centered impulse, is somehow coming from what other religions call the devil, something which is fighting against God, something which is trying to undo God's work, something which is the enemy of God.
Negative.
Well, yeah, but an enemy. For us, it's really key. Come on, are you joining? Come sit. For us, very key that it's actually not. That's not the truth of it at all. And this next line actually gets at what it is, right? And it's a. If you go with me, the parable used from the Zohar is a little bit colorful for our time, so I apologize to all for that. Litova adam sheitgaber aleha v'natzchena kimshal hazona shebazohar kadosh.
But the animal soul desires this for man's benefit, in order that he prevail over her and vanquish her, as in the parable of the harlot in the holy Zohar.
Right, so I'll introduce this. So the Zohar tells a story of a ruler who had a son and wanted to test the son because he'd raised his son to be a righteous, moral person, make the right decisions, care about all the subjects in the kingdom, be a good person. But he wanted to test if this is really the case. So he hired the very, very top prostitute in the country. Is there a politically correct word for prostitute these days? I don't know. Help me out. Pardon me? Sex worker in the country. And this was a woman who dealt with very, very refined people of tremendous wealth and taste, and she was a woman of tremendous culture and of course beautiful and appealing and this is someone that could easily seduce just about anybody. And he said, I want you to work for me. I want you to approach my son, and I want you to get him to go to bed with you. That's what I want you to do. That's your job. And you should use every possible means at your disposal to get him to give in. Right? This is the most beautiful woman in the whole kingdom who is tremendously charismatic, and she's going to try her very best to seduce the son and cause him to fail, and show that he actually has not been raised as well as the king thinks. Now we go into the mind of this sex worker, of this prostitute, right? From the son's perspective, she's the devil. She's working against the king, right? She's trying to make him trip up. She's trying to make him fail. She's trying to show that he really isn't all he is and trying to get him to sin. So from his perspective, she's against the king. She's the devil. She's the opponent. She's the enemy. But go into her mind, who is she really? Who is she rooting for? Does she really want to succeed? No. Because who's paying her? Who's she working for? She's working for the king. And if she fails, that will show that the prince is really of fine, fine character, and that will elevate the prince, and she'll be part of that elevation. The king will be very grateful. So really, inside, she's hoping that the prince fails. But still, who's she working for? The king. She has to do her very best to try and seduce him and try and get him to fail. But her deepest satisfaction will not be if she succeeds. Her deepest satisfaction will be if, in fact, she fails and the prince succeeds. And that's one of the biggest contributions of Jewish mysticism to the world, and in my opinion, where much of the world has gone a little away from a knowledge of what absolute oneness means. What trying to relate to an Ein Sof, this one being, and there's no other being here. And what does that mean? And who are we? If we think there's anything in the world that is not godliness, then we've broken the world up into fragments, right? So even though the culture says there's some devil and the devil is working against God, there's nothing working against God, right? Everything in the world is godliness. And from our limited perspective, it may seem like this is a challenge, this is an opponent. Really, even the animal soul, as we said, will not be happy if it wins. The animal soul can win, 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 win. You could just live a whole self-centered life. That could be all you think about. The divine soul never even makes a peep. But in the end, the divine soul will still be in there complaining. At our core, there's our deepest identity, who we are, that will not be happy, and neither will the animal soul be happy. The only way the animal soul itself will be happy is if the divine soul wins. And then the animal soul will have fulfilled its deepest purpose, and now will be giving its energy back to the compass bearing of the divine soul and following the flow of the Ein Sof, which is who created it, who asked it to come and challenge us. And if that story is a little colorful, an easier one would be a sparring partner, right? I don't know if anyone in our lives has ever done any training. Kickboxing is popular now, or jiu-jitsu, right? Imagine somebody's preparing for a fight, and they want to win, and they want to become strong, and they want to challenge themselves and be their best, and their coach gets them a sparring partner. Are they going to get them a little weakling that can't challenge them? No. Hopefully they'll get them a monster who's going to really, really make them rise to the occasion, will knock them around a little bit, who'll be very tough. Somebody walks into this gym and sees the sparring partner beating up on me for my match, and they think, oh, this guy's my enemy. Right? He's hitting me, he's not letting me do anything, he's challenging me, this is my enemy. But what does a sparring partner want? Right. He's on my team, he wants his team to win, he's there to help me.
Isn't that what gives us the growth?
Exactly.
Challenges?
Yeah.
It's a new light on all the tests that God put everybody through in the Torah.
Absolutely. It puts a new light on every test,
Yeah.
especially personal tests,
Abraham.
and especially internal tests where there's some drive in me, and I say, who is thinking that? What kind of a gross idea is that? Why would that pop into my mind? Look, it's there because I have a sparring partner called Nefesh Bamit, and it's here to help me. It's here to re-elevate everything about me. It's here to help me elevate things in the world, as we'll learn. And if it's doing its job, it's actually knocking me around a little bit, and that's going to help me grow. But it's not working for anybody but Ein Sof, right? There's even though there's a dichotomy within us, the animal soul is not an enemy. The animal soul, at its core, actually wants to be defeated.
So how does this work with the Job story? Or does it?
What aspect of it, of the Job story?
Well, supposedly, God and the devil, right?
Yeah.
Although we don't recognize devil, is challenging Job in his beliefs. And then his friends are furthermore challenging
Yeah.
Job. So is this related?
Yeah, so it's not the devil, it's Satan, so it's the accuser. So
Okay.
that figure in our mysticism is actually not there working against God. This is God's attorney general, right? You got to make sure that people, there's rules down here. You either follow them or you don't. And so you need an attorney general to come and say, you know what, on the outside, but really, if you open up the books, there's something going on in here. So it's actually Satan is working for the Ein Sof, coming down and kind of shaking things up and testing whether we're generally legitimately righteous or not, right? But to me, what I take away from Job, which was the question, is not is Satan working against the Ein Sof? Of course not. What I take from Job is there's a difference between me saying I understand that everything happening around me is for my good, that everything is godliness, versus I can see why. Sorry, let me rephrase that. The difference between having faith that everything is godliness and there for purpose, and me actually understanding how the puzzle pieces fit together. Right? So the story of Job is one where you're reading it and it seems so unfair. How could this righteous person be punished so poorly just on a whim? That's not fair. But in the end, not only can't we understand huge unfairness, where someone's life is demolished, we also can't understand tiny unfairness. Right? As Label, my teacher, says, I can't understand why God would create a world where I would walk down the street and step on and murder an ant. Right? That's also unfair. And I also don't understand it. Right? So from the small to the large, there's a difference between saying, I get the picture, I see how it fits together, versus I'm going to have faith, as our tradition says, that everything is there for a purpose, including Satan, or including my nefesh be'amit. It's all just my sparring partner, right? Now, why did the coach get me I'm a lightweight and the coach got me a heavyweight sparring partner and I can't even get one punch in? Okay, maybe I know better than the coach. But in this case, our coach is an infinite being called God, so we don't, right? So we're not going to understand, and you wouldn't expect a child to understand a complex physics experiment, right? Although you could explain little details of it. And likewise, we shouldn't expect to understand all the details of Job or our lives, etc. See it fitting in. Does that speak to your question?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, let's start chapter 10. Da-da-da-da. Oh, we're making such progress. It's the fastest Tanya class ever to be taught. Yeah, let's go both ways. I'll pass them around this side too. All right, so chapter 10. If you remember at the beginning chapters, we talked about 5 categories of people, right? 2 types of tzaddikim, 2 types of rasha, and the Beinoni. So 2 types of righteous people, a complete and incomplete, in other terms. A complete self-centered person and an incomplete one. And finally the Beinoni. We'll just introduce chapter 10, I guess. In chapter 10, the Alter Rebbe will go more deeply into the definition of a tzaddik and all the levels of a tzaddik. In chapter 11, we'll return and define the rasha. And finally, chapter 12, we define the Beinoni. Right? So when he says, first we'll need a discussion on before we get to it, that's what he means. I don't know if you remember we said we're going to take quite a journey before we get to defining the Beinoni. Well, we're now reaching the last 3 chapters of that journey of the set.
Who determines when you get to be a tzaddik?
That's a spiritual definition. I mean, we'll learn from this class, but when you see this chapter, you can't look at somebody and know objectively are they a tzaddik or not. You can't even look inside and know objectively. As we said, Rabbah, one of the greatest scholars, sages, and tzaddikim of his time, the greatest, said, for instance, I'm a Beinoni. So he made a mistake. He thought he was a Beinoni, not a tzaddik. So as you'll see, it's very tricky, and the point of this is not actually to become a tzaddik. This is Sefer Shel Beinoni, so it's not even a question we'll need to consider too much of whether, how do you know if you're a tzaddik? Okay, page 150, V'hineh kashe ha'adam magbir nafsho helokit. Wait, Joey, who read last?
Yeah.
Dan, you read it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I must have been sleeping. When a person causes his divine soul to prevail over the animal soul.
Right, so when I win this moment, and I got A or B, and A is sit and have my coffee for another hour and a half, and B is go out and help a friend who has a flat tire, right? I really want to sit outside, I'll call someone else. Oh, it's so cold outside. Whatever, it's the right thing to do, I'm going to do it, right? So now divine soul is sparking, it's flown through my intellect, I felt the appropriate emotions, I had the right thought. Now I say to them on the phone, okay, I'll be there in 10 minutes, and now I get up, and the body starts actually expressing the garments of the divine soul. Good, right? So I've caused my divine soul to prevail. ונלחם כל כך עם הבהמית עד שמגרש ומבאר הרע שבו מחלל השמאלי.
And when he wages war against the animal soul, to the extent that he banishes and eradicates its evil from its abode within him, namely the left part of the heart.
Right, so now it's more than just one prevail. I've done it again and again and again, and I fought so hard that now when my friend calls, of course I'm going to go and help them. What else would I do? Wouldn't even occur to me to sit and have my coffee and let someone else help my friend. Right? And every scenario, that's what I'll do. Relationships, interactions with the world, food, internal thoughts, and what I'm going to allow myself to daydream about. In all those areas, it's always going to be the divine soul that prevails all the time. כמו שכתוב, וביערת הרע מקרבך.
As it is written, you shall eradicate the evil from your midst. which implies that one ought to eradicate the evil within himself.
And the person,
You want to continue?
yeah, please.
Okay. The person who has in fact eradicated evil from his heart has not only banished the eternal, practical expression of evil thoughts, words, or actions, but has eradicated the evil itself. It has no place in his heart. He no longer desires evil.
Right, so this is a quote from Deuteronomy, which is talking in its context about you have a murderer, you have to eradicate them from our midst. You have to actually stone them or whatever, right? So it's talking about social repercussions and punishment, but we're elevating it, or we're looking at the spiritual aspect of it perhaps. We're saying not eradicate evil people from our communities, but eradicate evil from Mikir Becha, from within me, from my midst.
Does my 2-year-old grandson have an animal soul yet?
Question is, does my 2-year-old grandson have an animal soul?
Yeah.
The answer is everyone's born with an animal soul and a divine soul, but only one of them is consciously affecting them, right? The animal soul consciously is with us at birth, and as a child, I'm basically self-centered. That's why a baby will wake up and cry in the middle of the night without any compunction, and no one thinks that's wrong. Whereas if I were to wake up at 3 a.m. and start crying that I want a pizza, my wife would have something to say about it, right? So, yes, at bar mitzvah, or bat mitzvah, that's when the divine soul, which we have, but is more affecting just on an encompassing level, not consciously, now can flow in consciously, and now we have both. So children have the animal soul acting consciously, the divine soul surrounding them superconsciously, and then adults have both potentially affected them consciously, but they have to work at the divine soul being a conscious force. They have to train it. So in this case, we're talking about actually not just doing the right thing at this moment, and not just doing the right thing all the time, but actually it would never occur to me to do the wrong thing. I've eradicated it. Right? So now we're going beyond behavioral. We're going beyond what we're expressing, and we're talking about entering the realm of a tzaddik, where we've actually transformed to some extent, well, let's not use transform, where the nefesh, the Yetzer Hara, the drive from the nefesh b'mit, is dormant, and it doesn't bother me at all, and it wouldn't occur to me, right? We've been in this room for an hour, and we're about to end. No one has thought, wow, I'd love to eat that microphone. Right? I'm not, wow, look at this, how did I sit here and not eat this, right? It hadn't occurred to me. Like, what are you talking about? Eating a microphone, right? Now, we're at a bacon cheeseburger. Maybe I would have thought, it would occur to that, it's sitting here for a reason. I don't know, right? So, according to my level of kashrut, I wouldn't eat it. But I'm not saying it wouldn't occur to me that it tastes good. Of course it would, right? So, it's taking that bacon cheeseburger moment and turning it into a microphone moment, right? Someone operating at this level, which is getting to the level of a tzaddik, is actually, they'll walk by the beautiful challah on the last day of Pesach, they'll walk by the bacon cheeseburger, they'll walk by the ad with the young woman wearing almost nothing, and it'll be like that microphone. Why would I eat it? Why would I look at it? Why would I think about it? It doesn't even occur to me, right? So it's not just that I overcome it, that I say, no, not for me. I make the right decision all the time. I've actually transformed the drive to do it so it just doesn't bother me, it's dormant.
Is there another definition for the word hara other than evil?
Yes, have I been using evil today?
Well, it's here, and I just wondered if there's another, it's been bothering me, so I wondered if there's another.
Yeah, we talked about the definition of ra and really how evil doesn't get it, because evil implies insidious and nefarious, right? Ra just means self-centered.
Okay.
Yeah. So a moment of evil could be, I'm sitting down to eat my Shabbos meal, and I've said the blessings, and it's all great food. I'm with my family, and I think, oh, my wife makes such a good chicken soup. Let me enjoy my chicken soup. Wow, I want a second bowl, right? Now, is that destructive? My wife loves that I appreciate her chicken soup. I mean, why should I eat chicken soup? It's Shabbat. But if I'm doing it because of this, primarily because it tastes good, now there's a moment of self-centered drive. So that's raw. I'm not murdering anybody. I'm not stealing anything. But if I can eat the chicken soup and enjoy the taste because it's tasting soup is a gift from the Ein Sof, and because I'm elevating it and enjoying Shabbat, that's just another level, right? So at every level, ra can just mean self-centeredness. Okay, we'll pick up with our discussion of tzaddik next class. Thanks, everybody. Any questions, just hang around.
So I have a question. So, on the one hand, you've done the work,
Yeah.
and it's dormant, those feelings are dormant.
Yeah.
You don't even notice them. But the fact that you don't notice them doesn't mean you're not struggling with it. So do you get a